The calculus of this universe was precise, brutal, and absolute. It was an equation written in blood and mana, a rigid hierarchy where every variable had a defined value. A gate would tear open the fabric of the world. Monsters, their threat levels pre-classified by an unseen system, would emerge. Hunters, their own power neatly ranked from the expendable E to the legendary S, would engage. The results were quantified: success rates, casualty projections, mana expenditure. Death was not a dramatic twist. It was a statistical probability, a permanent subtraction from the ledger. This was the order of things. To live within this world was to know your place within its arithmetic. The system measured, judged, and assigned worth. It was the ultimate, unquestionable law. In the shattered heart of Seoul's Gangnam district, that law was breaking down. An S-rank gate, designated Cocytus 7 *, had not just been breached, it had undergone a catastrophic inversion. The dungeon wasn't spilling out, it was pulling the city in. The ground yawned open in a wound a kilometer wide, swallowing skyscrapers whole, digesting them into jagged, geometric shards that floated in the abyssal updraft. From the tear, reality itself bled a freezing, screaming wind. And from that wind, they coalesced, creatures of shifting obsidian and fractured light, their forms defying stable biology, moving with the eerie, predictive precision of entities spawned from pure data. They were not monsters of flesh and instinct. They were errors given form. The Hunter Association's response was the pinnacle of their doctrine. It was also a symphony of failure. A perimeter of A-rank long-range hunters unleashed volleys of elemental fury, ice lances that shattered on contact, firestorms that were siphoned into the creatures' dark bodies. S-rank vanguards, heroes whose names were known continent-wide, moved to engage. One, known as Ironclad, his skin a living alloy capable of withstanding tactical missiles, led the spearhead. A tendril of pure shadow, no thicker than a man's arm, lashed out from the central mass. It did not strike with force. It phased through his legendary defense, wrapping around his torso with the gentleness of a caress. Then it contracted. The sound wasn't of metal breaking, but of crystal being meticulously ground to powder. Ironclad's scream was cut short, his body rendered into dissipating motes of light and blood. The system notification for his death flickered, then corrupted, displaying strings of gibberish code. In the underground command bunker 5 kilometers away, pandemonium was giving way to a cold, silent dread. The holographic tactical map was a sea of crimson alerts. Mana readings from the gate core were climbing in an exponential curve that had long since left the S-rank scale behind. "It's rewriting the local rules," a chief analyst screamed, her voice cracking. "The dungeon's parameters are recursive. It's generating threats based on our own countermeasures." Every strategy they deployed was analyzed, adapted to, and overcome within moments. It was like fighting a mirror that learned and then improved upon every move. And in the deepest stratum of that rewriting dungeon, in the chamber where the core's corruption was most concentrated, space-time finally developed a stress fracture. It was not another gate, it was a puncture wound in the canvas of this universe. A silent, brilliant spike of gold-white light, the color of a sun's heart, stabbed through the chaos and vanished. No mana surge registered, no system alert pinged. It was an event outside the event log. He appeared standing on a platform of fractured data streams, blinking against the gloom. Goku shook his head, a dull ache throbbing behind his temples. The last clear memory was the white nothingness of the hyperbolic time chamber, the immense gravitational weight of trying to hold Ultra Instinct's perfect, thoughtless state. He'd pushed, as he always did, past the point of exhaustion into that strange realm where his body moved and his consciousness watched. There had been a tear, a sense of the chamber's very rules straining, and then a violent, soundless lurch. Now this. The air was viscous, pressing down on him not with weight, but with intent. It was heavy with despair, with a sharp, metallic tang that reminded him of broken machinery, and beneath it, the sourceless, psychic scream of dying things. It felt artificial, unlike any key he'd ever sensed. He looked around. The chamber was a cathedral of nightmare geometry. Walls shifted between solid stone and cascading streams of green, luminous code. In the center, a pulsating sphere of corrupted data, the dungeon core, floated, tendrils of darkness lashing out from it to sustain the horrors filling the room. And the horrors had noticed him. Dozens of forms, their bodies a blend of insectoid chitin, molten rock, and flickering holography, turned from their slaughter of the last few hunters. Their eyes, if they could be called that, were lenses of cold, scanning light. Across the cavern, pinned beneath a fallen spire of black crystal, a hunter woman in tattered white armor stared at him. One of her arms was gone, severed cleanly, a medical tourniquet glowing faintly on the stump. Her face was pale with blood loss and shock, but her eyes, wide and disbelieving, were fixed on Goku. They held no hope. Hope had died minutes ago, only a final, numb confusion. Asterisk. Who? How? Goku met her gaze for a second, his own expression one of open, curious surprise. Then he looked back at the approaching monsters. His initial disorientation melted away, replaced by a familiar, warm ignition in his chest. A challenge. Unknown, strange, but a challenge nonetheless. A grin, earnest and bright, spread across his face. Wow, he breathed out, the word cutting through the chamber's low-frequency hum. Tough-looking guys. One of the creatures, a four-armed construct of interlocking black blades and bone-like struts, designated by the now-failing system as Blade Monarch Sentinel. Error, acted. It didn't roar, it calculated. Identifying the new variable, it executed the optimal attack vector, a vanishing step forward that bypassed physical acceleration, its primary scythe limb appearing instantaneously at Goku's neck. The strike carried the absolute authority of a killing blow that had erased S-rank hunters. It was not brute force. It was inevitability coded into motion. Goku did not assume a fighting stance. He did not flare his ki into a visible aura. He simply leaned to the left, not with supernatural speed, but with the casual, unthinking ease of a man avoiding a low-hanging branch. The scythe passed through the space where his head had been, the vacuum of its passage pulling at his hair. The Blade Sentinel's processing unit stuttered. The outcome did not match any combat simulation. The variable had moved without detectable energy expenditure, without telegraph, without asterisk, any data asterisk. It initiated a contingency analysis. Before it could complete a single cycle, Goku reached out and tapped a finger against its central chassis, right over its core housing. It was a gentle, almost playful motion. Asterisk crack, asterisk. The sound was profound, deep, and internal. Not an explosion, but the sound of fundamental integrity failing. A web of hairline fractures, glowing with a sickly internal light, raced across the Sentinel's entire exoskeleton. For a moment, it stood frozen, a statue of cracked obsidian. Then, with a sound like shattering glass, it dissolved. Not into gore or shadow, but into a fine, inert black ash that drifted to the floor. Absolute silence swallowed the chamber, broken only by the low thrum of the corrupted core. The other monsters halted their advance, their targeting systems reassessing, caught in a loop of conflicting protocols. The pinned hunter woman had stopped breathing, her mind refusing to process what her eyes had seen. An entity that had slaughtered her entire raid party, erased by a asterisk tap asterisk. Goku bounced lightly on the balls of his feet, his grin turning eager. He swept his gaze across the frozen horde, his fighting spirit beginning to radiate outwards, not as a threat, but as an open, joyous invitation. "Come on, all at once," he called out, his voice echoing in the vast space. "I want to see what you can do." The hive mind of the dungeon core, prioritizing the elimination of the irrational variable, overrode individual creature protocols. They attacked in a unified, terrifying wave. A tide of claws, energy beams, spatial distortions, and conceptual curses flooded towards the single man. It was an assault designed to delete anything with a mana signature. Goku moved. He did not become a blur of light, did not unleash a torrent of energy blasts. He flowed asterisk. He stepped into the tide, and it parted around him. A punch, delivered with the relaxed precision of a craftsman, connected with a magma hound's skull. The creature's entire body solidified into cold basalt and then crumbled. A gentle sidestep allowed a beam of null energy to pass by. He redirected it with a flick of his wrist into a swarm of razor flies, erasing them. A kick, so light it seemed a tap, sent a 10-ton golem of fused corpses flying backwards into 3 of its kin, the impact reducing them all to a splash of dissipating data. He was not fighting them in the sense of a battle. He was a man walking through a storm, and where he stepped, the storm ceased to be. Each motion was efficient, effortless, a perfect expression of power so absolute it appeared as simplicity. He was dispersing them, not with rage, but with the unthinking finality of a law of physics. On the surface, in the besieged command bunker, the data feeds erupted into chaos before suddenly, eerily calming. The lead tactical officer stared at his screen, his face pallid in the glow. "Report!" the acting commander barked. "Sir, the core's energy signature just spiked beyond measurable parameters. For 0.3 seconds. Then, it's gone." "The gate collapsed?" "No, sir. The gate is still active, but every single monster signature inside, they're gone. Not dead, not retreating. Asterisk deleted. Asterisk scans show 0 hostile life signs below the B7 stratum." "It's empty." "What about our remaining hunters? Ironclad's team?" "No life signs from the Vanguard, but we're reading one new biosignature in the core chamber. It wasn't there 60 seconds ago." "A survivor? One of ours?" The analyst's voice was hollow. "No, sir. It's not registered to any hunter ID. It's not broadcasting a mana signature at all. The system is trying to classify it now." On the main screen, the system's diagnostic window flickered. It attempted to apply its analysis. Scanning. It measured physical density. Error. Value exceeds parameters. It assessed energy output. Error. Null reading. Source invalid. It attempted threat classification. Processing. The window flooded with cascading strings of corrupted code, binary bleeding into glyphs, glyphs dissolving into static. With a final, almost resigned flicker, it displayed a single, stark verdict in blood-red text. Entity, unrankable. Classification, beyond system parameters. Threat level, indeterminate. The silence in the bunker was colder than the void of space. The system was the bedrock of their reality. It could categorize a natural disaster, appraise a demigod, quantify a curse. For it to fail, to return asterisk, indeterminate asterisk, was not a measurement. It was a theological crisis. It meant something had walked into their structured world that obeyed none of its rules. Power here was ranked, filed, and understood. This was power that could not be ranked. It was a syntax error in the universe's core programming. The first field reports from the extraction team that reached the core chamber were fragmented, delivered in the shaky voices of men who had witnessed the impossible. They spoke of a man with dark, spiky hair, wearing simple orange and blue training clothes, standing amidst a field of settling ash. He was smiling. He helped lift the crystal off the wounded hunter. His first question, asked with genuine, upbeat curiosity, was, "Hey, are there more strong guys like those around here?" The higher echelons of the association felt a dread that had nothing to do with monsters. A gate could be closed. A monarch could, in theory, be opposed. This was different. This was a living, breathing anomaly that treated their apocalypse as a light workout. He was friendly, he was helpful, and he was utterly, terrifyingly incomprehensible. Far from the chaos, in a realm untouched by the crumbling city or the panicked bureaucracy, a presence that existed as a fundament of this world shifted its attention. The battle had been a distant tremor. The gate corruption, a minor irritation. But this was a novel signal. Within his domain, a space of perfect, absolute darkness where light went to die, Sung Jin-Woo opened his eyes. He sat upon a throne that was not made, but simply asterisk was asterisk, an extension of his will. He had felt the gate's aberrant flare. He had felt the deaths of the hunters, brief, insignificant flickers extinguished. He had felt the monster's presence vanish not through his own power, but through an external cleansing action. And now, he felt the source. It was a presence, bright, not in a visual sense, but in the way it registered against the constant, quiet hum of death he commanded. It burned with a potent, vibrant energy, but it was empty, profoundly, disturbingly empty. It contained no trace of the system's architecture, no mana circuits, no skill tree, no rank designation. It held no lineage of monarch or ruler. It was a blank page in the great leather-bound ledger of the dead. It was not a shout of defiance or a declaration of war. It was a question mark written in a foreign alphabet. A slight, almost imperceptible frown touched Jin-Woo's lips. He did not care for disruptions. He cared for order, for the balance he enforced. This anomaly was not in itself a threat to that order. Its actions had in fact removed a threat, but its very existence was a destabilizing equation. It was a variable with no assigned value, operating in a world built on calculation. The Shadow Monarch did not move from his throne, but his consciousness, vast and intricate as a galaxy of shadows, focused on that bright, empty point in soul. He did not like mysteries. He did not like unanswered questions. And this smiling, powerful void was the most compelling question he had encountered in a very long time. The stage was set. The unmeasurable force had arrived. and the absolute sovereign had taken note. The arithmetic of this world was about to be tested by a number it had never been designed to contain. Segment 2. A warrior without rank. 45,280 characters. Protocol was the Hunter Association's scripture, and in the wake of the Cocytus 7 incident, they turned to it with the fervor of the desperate. The anomaly, now officially designated Subject Omega in cold clinical files, represented a crisis of categorization. It could not be left to wander. The three pillars were invoked: containment, evaluation, control. The goal was not hostility, but understanding. A desperate attempt to fit the square peg of this smiling man into the round holes of their universe. The escort to the maximum security evaluation facility, Black Rock Citadel, was a masterpiece of surreal tension. A convoy of armored vehicles, piloted by stone-faced S-rank hunters whose eyes never left Goku, wound its way up the slopes of a dormant volcano. Above, cloaked aerial drones circled, their sensors trained not on the terrain, but on the single passenger in the central transport. Inside, Goku sat by a window, his face pressed against the reinforced glass, marveling at the landscape. Whoa, you built this whole place into a mountain? That's so cool. His escort, a veteran A-rank hunter named Kaito, who had seen entire guilds wiped out, could only nod mutely, his knuckles white on his weapon. The subject showed no fear, no suspicion, only the open curiosity of a tourist. He asked about the local wildlife, about the vehicle's power sources, about whether the hunters trained hard. His friendliness was more unnerving than any glare. Black Rock Citadel was a tomb of science built to dissect gods. Its walls were lined with mana-dampening alloys, its rooms capable of withstanding continent-level impacts. It was where they tested prototype weapons and evaluated potential national-level threats. To Goku, with its gleaming halls, humming machinery, and teams of people in white coats, it looked like a fascinating fairground. The evaluation chamber was a sterile, white sphere 100 meters in diameter. A panel of the association's top researchers, led by Dr. Aris, observed from a shielded gallery above. Goku stood in the center, still in his gi, looking around with interest. So, what do we do first? Test 001, Mana Resonance. A senior A-rank hunter from the Measurement Division, a man known for his precise calibration skills, stepped forward as a control. He placed his palm on a central pedestal upon which sat a flawless mana crystal the size of a human head. The crystal reacted instantly, its interior kindling with a brilliant, stable blue light that pulsed in time with the hunter's heartbeat. Data streamed across the gallery screens. Subject: Hunter Lee. Mana output: A rank, high. Affinity: kinetic enhancement. Stability: 98.7%. Dr. Aris spoke through the intercom, her voice carefully neutral. Subject Omega, please place your hand on the crystal, just as Hunter Lee did. Okay. Goku walked over, gave the glowing crystal an appreciative glance, and laid his palm flat on its cool surface. Nothing. The crystal remained inert, dormant, as lifeless as a common stone. Not a flicker, not a whisper of light. The gallery screens, primed for a data deluge, showed flat lines. Mana output: null. Affinity: none detected. Stability: error. A murmur rippled through the observers. Faulty crystal, someone said. They replaced it with a backup, then a tertiary unit from a different manufacturing batch. Each time, Goku complied amiably. Each time, the result was the same: profound, absolute nullity. He lifted his hand, looking at his own palm as if puzzled. Is it supposed to do something? It measures your internal energy, Dr. Aris explained, her voice tighter now. Oh, my key? Goku's face brightened. Well, that's different. It's not out right now. I'd have to power up for you to feel it, and, He glanced around the pristine white chamber. Might break your neat room. Kai. The word meant nothing in their databases. It was not mana. Mana was an external, ambient force hunters drew upon and shaped with their will and the system's templates. Ki was life itself, an internal furnace stoked by spirit, discipline, and battle. It was will given form from the inside out. It did not register on their scales because it was the hand moving the scale, not the weight upon it. Test 002. Combat Simulation and Threat Response. The white panels of the chamber shifted, projecting a hyper-realistic environment, a ruined cityscape. From a coalescence of light and hard light matrices, a monster formed. It was a replica of a known S-rank threat, a juggernaut-class Earthshaker, a towering behemoth of stone and magma with fists that could level city blocks. Its roar was synthesized from battlefield recordings, a sound designed to trigger primal fear and adrenaline spikes in even the most seasoned hunters. Goku watched it materialize, his head tilted. He didn't assume a stance, he just watched, analytical. The Earthshaker locked onto him and charged, each step shaking the simulated ground. Goku nodded, as if satisfied with something. Then he vanished. There was no blur, no streak of light, no sonic boom. One moment he was 10 meters in front of the charging behemoth. The next, he was standing directly behind it, his right hand resting lightly on the back of its holographic neck. He hadn't moved through the space, he had simply ceased to be in one location and was in another. In the gallery, the monitoring systems went insane. Spatial sensors reported no movement. Thermal cameras showed no heat trail. Kinetic trackers detected no displacement of air. The core AI, tasked with analyzing the subject's combat style, encountered a logical paradox. To move from point A to point B, a physical object must traverse the intervening space. Subject Omega had not. The system attempted to resolve the paradox, its processing load spiking. Warning lights flashed as it began to recursively question its own sensor data. With a shower of sparks and a puff of smoke from an overloaded console, the simulation crashed. The Earthshaker flickered and died. The chamber returned to sterile white. Goku lowered his hand, looking slightly disappointed. Oh, did I break it? Sorry. Test 003. Physical limit analysis. They brought him to a different chamber, dominated by a colossal hydraulic press. It was a piece of engineering designed to measure the concentrated force of Titans. The plate was a 5-meter disc of reinforced Ori halcon. A digital display listed its maximum calibrated capacity, 1,200,000 metric tons. A technician, his voice shaky, explained, Subject Omega, please apply gradual pressure to the actuator. We need to establish your baseline tensile output. Goku walked up to the machine. He looked at the massive lever, then back at the technician. How hard should I push? Just begin gently. We will tell you when to stop. Goku nodded. He wrapped his fingers around the lever, a piece of metal as thick as a tree trunk. He thought for a second about what gently meant. He applied a minute fraction of pressure, the kind of force he'd use to test if a ripe fruit was ready to pick. There was a deep internal groan of metal pleading for mercy. Then, with a soft, devastating whump, The entire multi-story apparatus, the hydraulic pistons, the Ori-Halcon plate, the monstrous frame, imploded. It wasn't crushed, it was compacted. In the span of a heartbeat, several thousand tons of the world's most durable machinery were folded into a perfect, seamless cube of scrap metal, roughly the size of a small car. The cube sat in the center of the chamber, steaming slightly. Dust settled. Alarms that had begun to wail died out, their power sources severed. Goku stood holding the now useless lever, which had sheared clean off. He looked at the cube, then at the ashen-faced technicians behind the safety glass. He gave an apologetic, lopsided grin. Too hard? In the primary observation bunker, the quiet hum of machinery was replaced by a deeper, more profound silence. Dr. Aris slowly removed her glasses, rubbing her eyes. The data was not just inconclusive, it was offensive. It mocked their entire scientific framework. They had thrown their most advanced diagnostics at him, and he had returned not errors, but absences. No mana, no measurable movement, no upper limit to strength. He existed in the negative spaces of their understanding. Panic was no longer a spike of adrenaline. It had metabolized into a cold, chronic dread. The hunters assigned as his security detail, men and women who had faced down dragon-class threats, began to exhibit subtle signs of psychological erosion. They would catch themselves staring at their own hands, flexing their A-rank or S-rank strength, feeling the potent mana coursing through them. Then they would look at Goku, who was currently in the commissary, cheerfully consuming a stack of food trays that could feed a platoon, asking the cook if they had any spicy bean paste. Their power, their rank, their hard-won identities as elite defenders of humanity felt suddenly quaint, like children boasting about their sandcastle walls to an ocean. He was polite, he was cheerful. He was an existential anomaly in gym clothes, and his only consistent query was about finding a worthwhile fight. Frustrated by the sterile, pointless confines of the tests, Goku began to explore. His escorts, under orders to observe and accommodate within reason, found themselves less chaperones and more bewildered followers. He found a C-rank gate on the outskirts of the city, a routine incursion of goblins troubling a suburban fringe. The local hunter bureau was mustering a response team. Goku, sensing the weak, chaotic energy, walked past the perimeter tape. "I'll be quick," he called back to his flustered handlers. Inside, the dungeon was a cliched forest of twisted, oversized fungi. A pack of goblins, sensing a lone human, swarmed him with rusty blades and shrieks. Goku didn't fight back. He stood still. The blade struck his skin and shattered as if hitting a mountain of tempered steel. The goblins stumbled back, shrieking in a new key, confusion and terror. Goku observed them. He then began to mimic their movements, their hopping attacks, their clumsy swings. At first, his imitation was exaggerated, almost comical. Then, within seconds, it became flawless, a perfect replication that highlighted the innate, efficient brutality of their form better than they themselves could express it. He moved like the platonic ideal of a goblin warrior. The goblin chieftain, a larger specimen with a bone crown, charged in rage. Goku, still mirroring their style, caught the chief's club in one hand and stopped it dead. "Is that all you got?" he asked, his voice not mocking but genuinely inquisitive. The chief's beady eyes filled with primal fear. Bored, having learned nothing new, Goku exhaled. It was not a technique. It was just a sigh of disappointment given physical form. The breath left his lips and became a gentle, yet all-encompassing wind. It swept through the dungeon. Every goblin, every twisted fungus, every stone and root corrupted by the gate's mana was scoured away. In an instant, the ecosystem was erased. The chamber was left a bare, smooth, polished crater of bedrock. The gate core, deprived of all its generated content and destabilized by the foreign energy, flickered and died. The dungeon collapsed hours ahead of its predicted schedule, leaving the response team outside staring at a dissipating portal and a very embarrassed-looking association handler. This pattern repeated. His mere presence became a dungeon-breaking event. Low-level gates, D to B rank, would often simply quiet upon his entry. Monsters would cower in the deepest corners, their predatory instincts overridden by a deeper biological imperative. The presence of an apex predator from a completely different tree of life. He radiated a silent authority that had nothing to do with magic or systems and everything to do with pure transcendent power. Higher-level gates, A and S, reacted more violently. Their carefully balanced mana ecosystems would fluctuate wildly. Monster spawn rates would glitch, producing creatures with mismatched parts or causing bosses to appear in early chambers. The ambient mana itself seemed to recoil from him, as if trying to quarantine an incompatible virus. He was a stone dropped into the meticulously engineered stream of dungeon mechanics, and the stream was now breaking its own banks, desperately trying to flow around an immovable object. One evening, after word had spread of a rogue A-rank bear titan ravaging the northern provinces, a creature that had eluded hunter teams for weeks, Goku had taken a casual flight to investigate. He found it, a towering monstrosity of fur and volcanic rock, and dispatched it with a single focused punch that eradicated the beast without a sound or shockwave, leaving only a faint scent of ozone. A local food vendor, having watched from a hillside, offered him a rice ball in stunned gratitude. Goku accepted it happily and sat on a cliff edge to eat, watching the sunset paint the clouds in hues of orange and purple. He was happy. The physical challenges were fun, the new energies interesting. But as he sat there, a strange, hollow feeling settled in his chest. He replayed his interactions, the hunters in the citadel, their fear masking a kind of rigid professionalism. The teams outside the gates, treating each incursion like a hazardous job. No one's eyes lit up at the prospect of a stronger opponent. No one burned with the insatiable need to push past their own limits simply for the sake of the climb. Here, they fought to survive, to complete an objective, to earn a rank or a paycheck. The sacred, personal joy of the struggle, the pure, refining fire of testing oneself against a greater force, was absent. The world was full of powerful beings, but none of them were warriors in the way he understood it. They were soldiers or victims or forces of nature, not rivals, not partners in ascent. As the sun dipped below the horizon, stretching the shadows of the pines into long, grasping fingers, Goku didn't notice the darkness around him, deepening beyond the natural fall of twilight. He didn't see the inky pools that welled up from nothingness between the tree roots, pools from which silent, armored figures emerged. They were knights of ancient design, archers with bows of solidified night, massive beasts with eyes like cooled stars. They did not breathe. They did not shift their weight. They simply stood, arrayed in a perfect, silent perimeter just beyond the tree line, watching him with unmoving, serene blue flames where their eyes should be. They were not hiding. They were presenting. But Goku felt it, a pressure that had nothing to do with physical weight. It was an existential gravity, a weight of absolute, unassailable authority that seemed to emanate from the world itself, focusing on this spot, on him. It was cold, vast, and utterly still. It was the opposite of his own blazing, restless energy. It was the feeling of a final verdict, patiently waiting to be written. He stopped chewing. The last bite of rice ball sat forgotten in his hand. His head didn't snap around, he turned it slowly, his eyes sweeping across the gathering darkness. There was no alarm on his face, no fear. Instead, an intense, focused curiosity ignited within him, hotter and brighter than any battle lust he'd felt since arriving. The simple, happy grin faded, not into a frown, but into something more profound, more respectful. It was the small, knowing smile he reserved for the few beings whose sheer scale of existence commanded acknowledgement. For Beerus, for Whis, for forces that were less individuals and more embodiments of universal principles. He stood up, dusting his hands off on his pants. He faced the deepest concentration of shadows, where the presence felt most dense, most final. "Hey," he said, his voice calm and clear, carrying effortlessly through the still evening air. It wasn't a challenge, it was a recognition, an observation of fact. "You're pretty strong, aren't you?" The shadows did not respond. The armored figures did not stir. The blue flames of their gaze did not waver. They simply watched, a legion of silent witnesses, but the pressure shifted minutely. It was no longer just observing, it was considering. Far away in the heart of his domain, Sung Jin-Woo received the sensory input from his soldiers. The report was not of action, but of perception. The anomaly had not only detected the elite shadows that could stand undetected in the heart of a monarch's council, but had pinpointed the source of their authority. It had felt him, not his power as a blunt instrument, but his sovereignty as a fundamental fact. Jin-Woo's eyes, which had been closed in contemplation, opened. The anomaly was not merely a powerful, unclassifiable variable. It was perceptive on a level that transcended sensory input. It understood hierarchy on an instinctual level. This changed the calculus. Passive observation was no longer sufficient. The blank page in his ledger was now looking back at him, a question mark that had formed into an interrogating gaze. Segment 3. The Monarch Watches. 44,950 characters. The summons wasn't a sound, nor a message. It was an adjustment of reality's focal point. One moment, Goku was standing on the cliffside, the cool evening air thick with the silent regard of the Shadow Army. The next, the world smeared. The pines, the stars, the distant city lights. They all stretched into streaks of meaningless color before dissolving into a profound, hungry blackness. There was no sensation of movement. It was an instantaneous, absolute relocation, a subtraction from one place and an insertion into another. He found himself in a non-place. It was a fragment of a devoured reality, a pocket dimension that existed only because a will greater than creation commanded it to. The ground was a jagged plain of obsidian shards, a fossilized memory of 1,000 shattered dungeons. Above there was no sky, only a swirling, starless void, a perfect, empty black that seemed to drink the very concept of light. The air was still, cold, and carried the faint, clean scent of ozone after a lightning strike, mixed with the ancient dry odor of undisturbed tombs. There was no ambient mana. There was only an absence so complete it felt like a substance itself. Jin-Woo did not arrive. The realm simply became him. The darkness that pooled at the center of the plane thickened, coalesced, and rose. It did not form a shape. It acknowledged a shape that had always been there. A throne of solidified shadow grew from the ground like a black crystal flower, its angles severe and perfect, its back extending high into the void. Upon it, Sung Jin-Woo materialized, already seated, his posture one of absolute repose. His elbows rested on the arms of the throne, his fingers steepled before his lips. He wore no monarch's armor, no regalia of office, only his simple black combat attire. His expression was a study in composed finality. He was not a king holding court. He was the verdict awaiting its crime. He was calm. He was the period at the end of a very long sentence. Goku appeared a dozen yards away in a silent flash of white light. Instant transmission bridging the gap between the cliff and this void. He landed softly on the obsidian, his boots making no sound. He didn't stumble or look disoriented. His head swiveled, taking in the impossible geography, the jagged ground, the swallowing sky, the utter silence. His initial surprise melted into pure, unadulterated fascination. A wide, genuine grin split his face. "Whoa," he breathed, the words swallowed by the immense quiet. He looked directly at the throne, at the figure who was the source and center of this entire realm. "Did you make this place? That's so cool." His voice, bright and human, felt like an intrusion in the cathedral-like stillness. Jin-Woo's steepled fingers did not move. His eyes, dark and depthless, observed Goku with the analytical dispassion of a scientist examining a novel specimen. The anomaly's energy was palpable here, even more than in the living world. It was a bright, warm, restless hum against the eternal, cold silence of death. It was loud. "You are not of this world," Jin-Woo said. His voice was not raised. It did not echo. It simply was, a vibration that originated in the fabric of the pocket realm itself. It carried the density and gravity of a collapsing star, a sound that implied tremendous mass held in perfect check. It was a statement of immutable fact, not a question. Goku scratched the back of his head, his grin turning a bit sheepish. "Yeah, guess I got lost. 1 minute I'm training real hard, next thing I know, here." His eyes, however, never left Jin-Woo. The cheerful curiosity was still present, but a deeper current had surfaced. A focused, humming intensity vibrated just beneath his skin, like a reactor at idle, primed to go critical. "You're the one who's been watching me, right? From the shadows? You feel really strong." The last two words were spoken with a weight of their own, a fighter's sincere appraisal. "I am the Shadow Monarch," Jin-Woo replied, the title not a boast but a simple identifier, like stating water is wet or night is dark. "I am the arbiter of death in this world. Your presence disrupts the balance." "Balance?" Goku tilted his head, the concept seeming to bounce off him without purchase. He looked around at the void, at the throne of endings. "Sorry about that. I don't mean to cause trouble." His sincerity was disarming. "I just like training and finding strong guys to fight. It's the best way to get better." His expression brightened again, the earlier intensity refining into eager, open excitement. He took half a step forward, his body language opening up, inviting. "Speaking of, you feel like the strongest I've met here. Want to spar? Just a little one? I promise I'll hold back." The offer hung in the void, innocent and earth-shattering. Jin-Woo's expression did not alter by a single micrometer. No eyebrow twitched, no lip tightened. The absolute neutrality of his face was more telling than any scowl. "I do not spar," he said, each word precise and chill. "I do not fight to test my limits. I fight to end threats, to enforce order." Goku blinked. His smile, for the first time, faltered. It didn't vanish, but it softened into an expression of pure, uncomprehending confusion. It was as if Jin-Woo had just told him he didn't breathe air. The statement was so fundamentally alien to Goku's core being that it took a moment to process. "But," Goku started, his voice laced with genuine puzzlement, "how do you know your limits if you don't test them? How do you get stronger?" The question was childlike in its simplicity and devastating in its implication. It struck at the heart of their divergence. Jin-Woo's gaze remained locked on him, unwavering. "My strength is not something I earn through struggle," he stated, the finality in his tone leaving no room for debate. "It is not a mountain I climb. It is what I am. It is the mountain itself. It is complete." The words landed on Goku with a tangible weight. For the first time since arriving in this strange, ranked universe, he felt a flicker of something that wasn't excitement, curiosity, or even battle lust. It was a chill, a profound philosophical dissonance that seeped into his bones. Here, facing him, was power of a magnitude he could feel pressing against his senses, vast, deep, and immovable. But it was static. It was a monument carved from a single, flawless piece of obsidian. It did not yearn. It did not strive. It commanded. It did not grow. It simply was, with the cold, patient inevitability of a glacier or a grave. In all his life, through every enemy-turned-rival, Goku had always seen a challenge, a peak to be scaled. In Jin-Woo's absolute finished power, he saw for the first time not a challenge, but a wall. A perfect, endless wall that had no other side. The thrill in his chest guttered, replaced by a strange, hollow feeling. "I don't get it," Goku said, his voice quieter, softer. The cheerful energy had drained away, leaving behind a rare solemnity. "You do not need to," Jin-Woo replied, his tone unchanged. "You need to leave. This world has an order. Your nature is a disruption to that order. You do not belong here." As he spoke, the pocket realm began to breathe. The shadows around the base of the throne, which had been as still as the rock, stirred like black silk in an unfelt wind. Then, from the darkness at Goku's feet, shapes emerged. Not erupting, but rising, as if they had been kneeling there, submerged in the fabric of the ground for millennia. They were soldiers. Not monsters, not mindless beasts driven by hunger or instinct. These were soldiers. Knights in armor of blackened steel and polished bone, their helms featureless save for the slits where serene, cool blue flames burned. Mages draped in robes of twilight, staves of crystallized void energy crackling with silent power. Archers with bows of petrified shadow, arrows nocked but not drawn. Mythical beasts, a great wolf with a pelt of shifting smoke, a winged serpent whose scales drank the light. A giant of living granite with magma veins, stood with a disciplined stillness that was more terrifying than any roar. They did not emerge in a trickle, but in a silent, ceaseless tide. Hundreds, then thousands. They filled the jagged plain, rank upon perfect rank, extending back into the gloom until their forms blurred into a single dark mass. An army, the army of the dead, the conquered, the conscripted. They made no sound, No clank of armor, no growl, no rustle of cloth. The only sound was the immense pressure change silence of their collective presence. They did not radiate bloodlust or fury. They exuded a quiet, absolute inevitability. They were not a threat, they were a conclusion. This was not a show of force. It was a demonstration of fundamental reality. This was what true ultimate power looked like in this universe. Not a singular peak to be climbed through effort, but an ocean of finality in which any singular will, no matter how powerful, would eventually be submerged and extinguished. Goku's body reacted before his mind could fully process the scale. His casual stance evaporated. His feet slid apart, settling into a low, centered posture that was neither offensive nor defensive, but perfectly, primally ready. His back straightened, his shoulders squared. The air around him seemed to harden, not with a visible aura, but with a palpable field of intent. Beneath his skin, the divine mechanism of ultra instinct began to hum, a state of serene, autonomous readiness, aligning his every neuron and muscle fiber. His eyes, wide and intense, scanned the endless legion. He saw the flawless discipline, the unity of purpose that made them a single entity. He saw the cold, ancient power in each individual soldier. His gaze then swung back to the solitary figure on the throne, who had not moved a muscle, who commanded this ocean of death with a thought. The contrast was staggering, beautiful, and horrifying. One man, a monarch who held the weight of history's dead in his palm, whose power was an inherited, absolute sovereignty. The other, a man alone, with nothing to command but his own two fists, a lifetime of brutal training, and a will that defined itself through limitless growth. A low sound escaped Goku's lips, not a gasp, but a sigh of profound understanding. "So that's your power," he murmured. There was awe in his tone, but not the awe of fear. It was the stark, brutal awe of a mathematician seeing an elegant, unassailable proof. "You don't fight alone." Jin-Woo's head inclined a fraction of a degree. "I never fight," he corrected, his voice still that calm, dense vibration. "I command. To fight implies an exchange, a risk. There is no exchange here, only compliance." He was about to speak again, to issue the final directive for Goku to depart, when the pocket realm shuddered. It was not a shudder born from the clashing energies of the two beings within it. It was an external violation, a metaphysical screech of twisting data. The starless void above them fractured, jagged, sickly green lines, the exact hue of the system's interface, splintered across the blackness like cracks in a glass dome. They pulsed with a rhythmic, mechanical light, a visual representation of scanning protocols. A soundless psychic alarm began to bleat, a sensation of being indexed, quantified, and found flagrantly in violation of all parameters. The absolute domain of the Shadow Monarch, a space that existed outside the system's jurisdiction, a bubble of pure personal will, was being probed, contested. The system, the governing intelligence of the world, had finally triangulated the two massive, anomalous energy signatures, one a blazing unknown, the other a sovereign power it could not fully control, and had located them in a space that was not on any map. Its response was not tactical or strategic. It was administrative. It was not trying to attack Jin-Woo or Goku. It was trying to delete the unauthorized location itself, to purge the anomalous coordinate from its reality. Jin-Woo's eyes, which had held only calm analysis, narrowed. A flicker of pure, cold irritation passed through them. the annoyance of a master whose private study has been intruded upon by a buzzing, mindless insect. The sea of shadow soldiers rippled in unison, a wave of agitation passing through their ranks. The blue flames of their eyes burned a shade brighter. Goku looked up at the fracturing, code-riddled sky. He felt the pressure now, not the living, cold authority of Jin-Woo, but a hostile, inorganic, and vast presence pushing down on the realm. It felt like being trapped in a shrinking file, compressed by meaningless rules. His nose wrinkled. He said, glancing from the green cracks to Jin-Woo. Did we break something? As if in answer, the ground beneath their feet began to dissolve. Not into dust or ash, but into pixels, digital fragments of green system code and black void matter. The realm was unmaking itself from the edges inward, consumed by a conflict between an absolute will and an absolute protocol. The obsidian plane flickered, portions of it blinking in and out of existence. The throne of shadows wavered. The meeting was over. The conversation between the monument and the river was being terminated by the bureaucracy of the universe itself. Segment 4. Battle or Command. 44,860 characters. Reality reasserted itself not with a whimper, but with the sound of a universe cracking its own spine. There was a final, shrieking tear of green light, a lurch of nausea that transcended the physical, and then they were violently expelled. The pristine void of the pocket realm was replaced by sensory bedlam. They stood in the heart of soul, but it was a soul being unmade and remade by madness. The sky was a diseased tapestry. Swirling vortices of sickly green system code clashed against rolling banks of absolute black shadow that bled from every crevice and corner. These were not clouds, they were competing realities vying for dominance. Between them, spatial gates bloomed and died like malignant flowers opening at random, in midair, through the sides of buildings, in the middle of streets. They vomited forth disoriented monsters of every rank and classification. Goblins tumbled from a rupture 200 meters up, only to be incinerated by a passing beam of holy light. An S-rank magma worm emerged from a gate in the Han River, thrashing in confusion before a tendril of shadow speared it from below. The city was a dumping ground for every unstable, dimensional fracture in the local cosmos. The Hunter Association's command network was a symphony of pure panic. Communications were a garbled mess of screams, static, and corrupted data streams. Tactical maps flickered with thousands of red alerts that appeared and vanished at random. One desperate transmission from a battalion commander cut through. No pattern, no mana signatures stable. They're just appearing. The gates aren't following the rules. The system itself, the omnipresent arbiter of their world, was glitching, its notifications spamming every hunter's vision with overlapping, contradictory warnings and error messages. This was not a dungeon break, it was a root-level failure. The very architecture of the world was corrupting, its source code unraveling under the strain of hosting two entities it could not define or contain. And the world's immune system was activating. With a sound like a divine sheet tearing, a gate of impossible scale ripped open in the firmament. It did not lead to a dungeon. It shone with a harsh, oppressive, sterile white light. From it descended the rulers. They were beings of severe geometric beauty, their forms clad in armor of light and crystalline logic, their faces masks of serene, impersonal authority. They were the original administrators, the enforcers of the system's design, beings of absolute order who saw life, death, and magic as variables to be managed. Their presence did not bring warmth. It brought a chilling, airless clarity like the inside of a supercomputer. Simultaneously, from the depths of the fractured earth, from the ley lines now bleeding shadow, from the edges of human perception, the other monarchs answered the distress call of a destabilized reality. The Monarch of Frost materialized from a blizzard that flash froze a city district, his form a sculpture of glacial rage. The Beast Monarch's arrival was heralded by a bestial roar that shook the continent, his body a shifting mass of fang, claw, and primordial fury. The Iron Body Monarch rose from the subway tunnels, his steps turning asphalt to molten slag, a walking fortress of contempt. They were chaos, instinct, and dominion incarnate. They cared nothing for the human city being torn apart around them. They sensed something far more alarming. The Shadow Monarch's full, unrestrained presence, no longer cloaked in subtlety, and alongside it, a foreign signal of terrifying, undefined potency. The game board upon which their eternal war was played was not just shaking. It was on the verge of being flipped over and burned. What unfolded was not a battle. It was a cosmological systems crash. Rulers clashed with monarchs in the stratosphere. A sword of condensed light met a claw sheathed in permafrost, and the thunderclap of their collision shattered every remaining window in a 5-kilometer radius, the glass dissolving into harmless dust before it could hit the ground. A legion of holy knights, moving with flawless, synchronized purpose, engaged a tide of demonic beasts in a maelstrom of wings, claws, and searing righteousness over the city center. Spells of absolute zero froze city blocks solid, only for waves of shadow to swallow them whole. Beams of purifying energy scoured skyscrapers from their foundations, turning them to drifting ash. It was a war of absolutes, of opposed fundamental principles, and the city of Seoul was merely the parchment upon which they fought. Amidst this cataclysm, in a central square that had been cleared by a recent titanic impact, stood 2 points of profound stillness. Jin-Woo looked upon the apocalypse engulfing his city. This was not part of any plan. This was an unacceptable cascade failure, a direct result of the system's panic and the other monarch's reckless response. A flicker of cold, focused anger ignited within him. This was his domain. This was the humanity he had chosen to rule and, in his own way, protect. This chaos was an affront to his sovereignty. His eyes, which had been observing Goku with analytical interest, now scanned the crumbling skyline with the detached precision of a surgeon assessing a critical wound. He did not shout. He did not gesture dramatically. He simply raised his right hand, palm open, as if taking the reins of the world. And the shadows answered. They erupted from everywhere, not just from the edges of buildings or the undersides of cars. They poured from the memories of fear in the hearts of cowering civilians hiding in basements. They seeped from the grave soil of every cemetery within 100 miles. They coalesced from the very concept of darkness between the raging strands of light and ice. His army, no longer a demonstration or a silent escort, manifested for total war. It was a tide of silent, perfect night swallowing the city district by district. Not a mindless flood, but an intelligent, branching tsunami. Where a frost giant raised its icy club, 3 shadows in the form of giant, spiked chains erupted from a pool at its feet, binding and shattering it. A phoenix of holy fire dove to cleanse an area, only to be enveloped mid-flight by a swarm of smaller winged shadows that snuffed its flames like biting embers. A charging horde of the beast monarch's wolf creatures met a phalanx of shadow knights that did not yield a single millimeter, their silent defense as immovable as a mountain range. Jin-Woo stood at the epicenter, a statue of calm command. He did not move. His eyes flickered, processing 1,000 scenes at once. Each twitch of his will translated instantaneously into a tactical adjustment on the battlefield. A flanking maneuver here, a concentrated assault there, a sacrificial ploy to eliminate a high-value target elsewhere. The chaotic battlefield began to bend to the geometry of his unspoken words. He was a conductor, and the symphony was one of absolute efficient death. Goku watched, mesmerized. The scale was beyond anything he'd ever witnessed. The war on Namek, the battle with Kid Buu, they were playground scuffles compared to this. The raw power on display was staggering. But as he watched Jin-Woo's legions move with machine-like precision, a strange feeling settled over him, the sheer, impersonal nature of it. It was majestic, terrifying, but distant. It was power expressed as administration, as cold calculus. He felt no thrill from watching it, only a kind of awe at its terrible efficiency. Then, a squadron of the ruler's angels, serene androgynous beings with multiple wings of crystallized light and blades that hummed with systemic authority, broke off from their engagement with a legion of iron-body drones. They had sensed him, a power source of immense output, unaligned with either shadow or light, not registering on the mana spectrum. An unclaimed variable, a glitch to be corrected. In perfect, swooping formation, they dove towards the square, their intel as clean and sharp as their blades. Goku's pensive look vanished. A wide, genuine grin split his face, reaching his eyes. The hollow feeling was burned away by immediate, joyous purpose. All right. He did not summon an army. He did not command the elements. He planted his feet in the cracked concrete and waited. The lead angel descended, its blade aiming to split him from crown to pelvis, a strike that had erased fortified bunkers. Goku raised his right hand, index finger extended. The blade met the fingertip. The impact did not produce a metallic clang. It produced a coom of concussive force that radiated outwards in a perfect sphere. The ruins of the skyscraper directly behind Goku, already skeletal, were flattened into a pancake of powdered concrete and twisted rebar. The angel's expression of serene, programmed fury flickered. Its systemic analysis returned a cascading error. Target material indeterminate. Hardness exceeds parameters. Impact force nullified. Before it could recalculate, Goku vanished. He reappeared in the exact center of the angelic squadron's formation, not with instant transmission, but with raw, explosive speed that left after images of light. He moved. This was not the fluid, almost lazy evasion he'd used in the S-rank gate. This was combat. His fists became blurs of concussive light, not energy beams, but the physical air itself compressing and detonating with each punch. He weaved through their coordinated attacks, a single, overwhelming offensive force. He was a vortex of violence. An angel swung at his back. He leaned forward, letting the blade pass over him, and kicked upwards with his heel, sending the being rocketing into the stratosphere with a sonic boom. Two others crossed their blades in a scissoring motion. He caught both blades between his palms, clenched and shattered them like glass. the backlash of ruptured holy energy making the angels stagger. He took hits. A glancing blow from a spear of light seared across his shoulder, vaporizing a portion of his GI and leaving a faint red mark on his skin, a mark that faded in seconds. A concussive blast of holy sound washed over him. He shook his head like a dog shedding water, his grin never slipping. He laughed, a sound of pure, unfettered exhilaration that cut through the orchestral din of the larger war. Not bad. You guys are coordinated, like a real team. He was a paradox on the battlefield. Where Jin-Woo's power was a spreading, all-encompassing stain of control that swallowed conflicts whole, Goku's was a series of pinpoint, catalytic supernovas. One moment, 100 shadow soldiers would be locked in a grinding, silent struggle against a wave of the Beast Monarch's berserker ogres. Then, a hemisphere of golden light, a simple, expanded ki barrier, would erupt in the heart of the ogre ranks. There would be no explosion, just a silent, blinding flash. When it faded, the ogres were simply gone, and Goku would be standing there, steam rising from his Super Saiyan form, turning to the nearby Shadow Knights with a cheerful, "Need a hand with the rest?" The shadows would simply stare with their unmoving blue flames, their incomprehension as total as their discipline. The leaders of the invading forces took notice. High above, the Monarch of Frost, a being whose mind was a glacier of ancient malice, observed the disruption. The brightest ruler, its logic core processing the war's data stream, also isolated the anomaly. They saw the Shadow Monarch, a known and hated sovereign, a piece on the board whose moves could be predicted. And they saw this, a creature that fought not with spells or armies, but with adaptive, escalating physicality. It grew hotter, faster, more resilient with every exchange. It learned their attack patterns after seeing them once. It was not consuming mana. It was breaking their soldiers through sheer, incomprehensible force that seemed to have no source and no limit. It was a wild variable, an equation that kept rewriting itself. A strategy emerged from their diametrically opposed minds, a moment of perfect, cold synergy born of shared threat assessment. The two anomalies were powerful, but they were separate. Their methods were dissonant. If the full, combined fury of their forces could be focused, concentrated on that central point, they could be overwhelmed individually before their disparate powers could find synergy. Without communication, the Frost Monarch and the brightest ruler acted. The Frost Monarch summoned a blizzard from the heart of his domain, not snow, but a wave of absolute zero death. A creeping glacier a mile high and 5 miles wide, studded with countless frozen monstrosities, grinding towards the city center. Simultaneously, the brightest ruler channeled the full, purging power of the system's light. From the heavenly gate, a single, concentrated pillar of obliterating white energy, a beam meant to reset entire regions, lanced down, targeting the same square. The two attacks, ice and light, did not clash. They merged, twisting into a spiraling tsunami of annihilating force, a million entities strong in its vanguard, a conceptual wipe in its wake. It was a directed apocalypse, a deletion command aimed at two corrupted files. Jin-Woo's shadows reacted instantly, pulling back from other fronts and coalescing before him into a titanic, multi-layered shield of interlocking domes, each made of compressed darkness and screaming souls. It would hold, he knew it would hold, but the cost would be immense. The sheer, focused power would vaporize a significant portion of his army, requiring time and energy to remanifest. He would have to sacrifice pawns, knights, perhaps even bishops to absorb and deflect the blow. It was a acceptable loss in the equation of victory, but a loss nonetheless. His will braced, preparing to pay the price. A figure landed beside him, not with a crash, but with a deep, ground-settling thud that cratered the pavement. Goku stood there, his hair standing on end in its iconic golden spike, his aura a raging, crackling azure flame that hissed where it met the ambient shadow. He was breathing hard, not from exhaustion, but from exhilaration, steam rising in plumes from his shoulders. His eyes, blazing with blue light, looked from the oncoming cataclysmic wave, a wall of frozen, holy death that blotted out the sky, to Jin-Woo, the unflappable monarch who stood ready to meet it with infinite, expendable resources. In Goku's eyes, there was no calculation of loss. There was only the magnitude of the challenge and a spark of an idea. "Hey," Goku said, his voice vibrating with the raw power of the Super Saiyan form, yet utterly clear. He jerked his thumb towards the apocalyptic wave. "That's a lot." He then looked directly at Jin-Woo, his expression earnest, intense. "Want to handle it together? Your way and my way?" It was not a plea for help. It was not a suggestion. It was an offer, a challenge of a different kind. The ultimate test. Fight alone, each using their own paradigm. Jin-Woo expending his commanded legions in a grand sacrificial defense. Goku launching himself into the heart of it in a probably futile, albeit glorious frontal assault. Or attempt something unprecedented. Attempt to synergize the unmixable. Absolute dominion and limitless growth. To protect the city not through solitary might, but through the unpredictable, potentially world-breaking fusion of their diametrically opposed truths. Jin-Woo's eyes, which had been fixed on the approaching doom, shifted to meet Goku's. For a fraction of a second, a span of time shorter than a heartbeat, but longer than an eternity in a battle of gods, the absolute solitary certainty in the Shadow Monarch's gaze wavered. It was not replaced by doubt, but by something rarer, pure, tactical calculation stripped of all precedent. The system was broken. The old rules of engagement were null. The wave, a fusion of his two greatest enemies' ultimate attacks, was seconds away. The variable beside him had just proposed a new algorithm. His gaze flickered from Goku's blazing blue eyes to the tsunami of annihilation, then back. The cold anger at the disruption was still there, but it was now fused with a ruthless curiosity. What would happen? What could happen? He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Segment 5. When Growth Meets Death. 45,210 characters. The nod was not a contract. It was not an alliance. It was merely an acknowledgement of a shared moment in time and a shared target. What followed was not cooperation, not synergy, but a dissonant, world-breaking duet played on instruments that had never been meant to harmonize. Jin-Woo, his expression returning to its glacial calm, raised both hands before him, palms facing the oncoming cataclysm. He did not brace. He did not gather power. He simply rearranged. His will, a vast and silent signal, pulsed through the network of his domain. The landscape itself rebelled against the apocalyptic wave. From every shadow cast by the towering wall of ice and light, a paradoxical concept given the wave's self-illumination. But in Jin-Woo's world, where there was form, there was shadow. His elite soldiers materialized, not in front of the wave, but within it. They emerged from the darkness between frozen molecules, from the slender umbras behind falling shards of holy ice, from the pockets of null space within the beam of systemic light. It was a masterpiece of tactical malignancy. He did not attack the wave head-on. He turned the wave's own immense mass and energy against itself. Shadow assassins, the elite of his extraction corps, materialized clinging to the skulls of frost giants, their daggers of soul-forged obsidian plunging not into flesh, but into the core of magical ice that served as the creature's heart, shattering them from within. Shadow mages, their forms wreathed in anti-light, erected crackling domes of void energy directly in the path of angelic flight formations. The angels, creatures of pure systemic order, did not collide with the domes. They unraveled upon contact, their structured holy energy dissolving into harmless scattered photons, their wings disintegrating like sugar in water. Jin-Woo turned the wave into a battleground for a civil war it never knew it contained. He was a surgeon operating on a tumor, not by cutting it out, but by instructing the body's own cells to reject it. Into this chaotic, internalized maelstrom, Goku shot forward. He did not go around. He did not look for a weak point. He aimed for the densest, most furious heart of the conjoined attack. His Super Saiyan form became a blazing comet of azure and gold, trailing a wake of vaporized atmosphere. As he flew, he cupped his hands at his side. Blue-white energy, crackling with raw potential, coalesced between his palms with a sound like a gathering storm. Ka! Me! Ha! Me! The wave was upon him, a wall of absolute zero frost and purging light. The leading edge of frost giants raised crystalline fists. Ranks of angels leveled their lances. Ha! The Kamehameha that erupted was not a focused beam. It was a deluge, a river of pure, negating energy as wide as a city avenue, a physical manifestation of willpower so dense it displaced reality. It did not explode on impact. It erased. Where it touched the wave, the magical ice did not melt. It ceased to have ever been frozen. The holy light did not dim. It was overwritten. A perfect, smooth-edged canyon of nothingness was carved through the center of the apocalyptic tide. For a moment, there was a tunnel of clear air through the annihilation. Goku didn't stop. He was already moving, thinking, adapting. He saw a flash of shadow, one of Jin-Woo's knights momentarily pinning a towering, four-armed ice golem commander by spearing its shadow to the ground. Goku's eyes flickered. Instant transmission. He vanished from the head of his own energy blast and reappeared directly in front of the pinned golem. He didn't wind up. He simply thrust his palm forward. A short, devastating strike that channeled the kinetic energy of his flight into a point the size of a coin. The golem's chest and the frozen core behind it vaporized. The Shadow Knight withdrew its spear and melted away, already reassigned. This became the rhythm. The duet. Jin-Woo conducted the battlefield on a macro scale, creating moments of perfect vulnerability, orchestrating chaos within the enemy ranks. Goku, operating on a micro-instinctual level, was the precision scalpel, or more accurately, the demolition charge, that exploited every single opening. He was not following a plan. He was reacting to the flow of the Shadow Army's movements with a fighter's transcendent intuition. He used Jin-Woo's omnipresent control as a framework, a dynamic playground upon which to unleash his own boundless, improvisational offensive potential. Where a phalanx of shadow soldiers locked down a charging battalion of light-forged centaurs, Goku dropped into their midst like a meteor, a spinning kick releasing a ring of concussive ki that flattened them all. Where a shadow hydra wrapped its necks around a flying fortress of the Frost Monarch, Goku appeared on the fortress's bridge, delivering a single shattering blow to its command crystal before teleporting away. He was a force multiplier of apocalyptic proportions. Where shadows pinned a target, Goku annihilated it. Where Goku drew the focused, furious aggression of a dozen elite enemies, shadows would envelop them from behind, consuming them in silent darkness. They did not communicate. They did not coordinate. Their powers were not complementary. They were orthogonal, operating on different axes of reality. Yet in their dissonance, they found a terrible, inefficient, breathtaking effectiveness. Jin-Woo's power was the cold, inevitable tide, claiming territory and imposing order. Goku's was the lightning storm, randomly and violently erasing whatever the tide had isolated. The fused wave of frost and light did not break. It was not repelled. It was deconstructed. It was taken apart piece by piece, from the inside and the outside simultaneously, its conceptual unity shattered. The final, towering crest of the wave, a mountain of enchanted ice crowned with a nexus of holy energy, trembled. 1,000 shadow spears, launched from 1,000 different angles, pierced it simultaneously. And at the epicenter of that nexus, Goku materialized, his hands already glowing with a final condensed sphere of energy. He didn't shout its name. He simply pushed it forward. Dodan Ray. The thin, piercing beam of crimson energy lanced into the heart of the nexus. For a second, nothing. Then, a silent, white expansion. Not an explosion, an unmaking. The wave, and everything in a 2-kilometer radius of its front, simply ceased to be. The ice, the light, the monsters, the angels, all of it dissolved into a fine, luminous ash that drifted down like warm snow. The roar of battle was replaced by a sudden, ringing silence so profound it felt like a physical pressure on the eardrums. In the center of the vast, newly created plain of smoothed, glassy bedrock, the city district had been utterly erased down to the mantle. The two stood amid the gently settling dust. The air was clean, sterile, empty of mana or malice. Around them, the remnants of the larger war had ground to a halt. The other monarchs and rulers hung back at the edges of the devastation, their forces decimated, their wills shaken to the core. The brightest ruler hovered, its light flickering erratically as it processed the impossible event. The Frost Monarch's glacial form showed deep, cracking fissures of disbelief. The system's green code, which had been a cancer across the sky, now flickered weakly, like a corrupted monitor on the verge of shutting down, utterly unable to parse or log what had just occurred. Goku let out a long, steaming breath. The golden aura around him flickered and died, his hair settling back into its usual black spikes. He was panting heavily, sweat glistening on his skin, but his face was alight with a grin of utter, profound satisfaction. He turned to Jin-Woo, his eyes wide with admiration. "Wow," he exhaled, the word bursting out of him. "That was amazing! You're incredible! The way you move all those guys without even moving a muscle. It's like you're everywhere at once. I've never seen anything like it." Jin-Woo was still. Around him, his shadow army was silently reforming, ranks solidifying from the returning darkness. But his eyes, dark and depthless, were fixed solely on Goku. The cold, analytical focus was still there, but it was now layered with something new, a piercing, unequivocal recognition. He had seen it, clearly, undeniably. Mid-battle, the variable's power had not simply been expended, it had inflated. Its output had increased. The Kamehameha that carved the canyon was more potent than the initial barrier punch. The instant transmission jumps had become fractionally quicker, the reappearances more precise. The Dodon ray that delivered the final blow held a concentration of energy that had been absent at the fight's start. Goku had been learning during the apex of the conflict. He had adapted to the flow of the Shadow Army, internalized the attack patterns of the monarchs and rulers, and used that data to refine his own movements, to squeeze more efficiency and power from every ounce of his being. He grew not through rest, study, or inheritance, but through the very act of supreme struggle. It was a form of evolution that happened in real time, a power that fed on its own testing. It was obscene. It was illogical. It was, in a word that rarely crossed the Shadow Monarch's mind, fascinating. "You changed during the fight," Jin-Woo stated. His voice was flat, but it was a statement of measured fact, not a question. Goku wiped his brow with the back of his arm, still beaming. "Huh. Oh yeah, I always do. That's the whole point." He said it as if explaining that water was wet. When you're up against really strong guys, you gotta figure them out, right? And when you push yourself past what you thought you could do, that's when you find a new level. He looked at Jin-Woo, his expression earnest, seeking common ground. "You feel it too, right? That feeling when you break through your limit?" Jin-Woo regarded him. The question hung in the sterile air. "I have no limits to push past," he replied. The words were the same as before, an expression of his completed, absolute nature. But now, spoken after witnessing the boundless escalation beside him, they felt different, not false, but incomplete. They described a state of being, but not a potential. He had just been shown a different path, a path not of plateaued sovereignty, but of infinite, recursive ascent. It was not a better path. It was not a more powerful one. In that moment, their combined result spoke for itself. It was simply a different truth. A truth that made his own absolute power feel like a finished sentence, perfectly punctuated, while Goku's was an endless, expanding, questioning paragraph. Before the silence could deepen further, a roar of pure, primordial fury shattered it. The monarch of beasts, seeing its allies broken and sensing the shifting focus of the two anomalies, acted on its most basic instinct. Bypassing the reforming shadow lines in a burst of desperate, cunning speed, it targeted the source of the most volatile energy, Goku. It became a blur of fang, muscle, and wrath, a continent-shattering tackle fueled by every shred of its remaining essence, a suicide charge meant to trade its existence for a decisive strike. Goku's smile didn't fade. It intensified, sharpening into something purely focused. The fatigue vanished from his posture. This was what he understood. Simple, direct, one-on-one. "All right," he said, his voice calm, clear. "One-on-one." He did not power back up to Super Saiyan. He did not assume a fancy stance. He simply set his feet on the glassy ground, drew his right fist back, and met the charge. It was not a special technique. It was a punch. The punch, the culmination of a lifetime of training, of thousands of battles, of endless self-overcoming. It was not fueled by anger or a desire to destroy. It was fueled by respect for the challenge and the sheer, unadulterated joy of testing his craft. It was effort, incarnate. Jin-Woo, from his position, did not command a soldier to intercept. He did not raise a shadow wall. He simply watched. His analytical gaze absorbed every detail. This was data he needed. The Beast Monarch's charging form, a tempest of destructive force, met Goku's forward thrust. The collision did not produce a sound. It produced a profound, localized silence, as if space-time itself compressed into an infinitesimal point around Goku's fist, swallowing all vibration. For a single frozen heartbeat, the Beast Monarch's form was visible in perfect, terrible detail. Every straining muscle, every wild eye, every frothing fang. Then it began to unravel. Not into shadow, which would have meant absorption into Jin-Woo's domain. Not into ash or gore. It unraveled into its base neutral particles. Its existence wasn't ended. It was returned. Its essence dissociated into harmless light and neutral cosmic dust, its consciousness dispersing like a sigh. The terrifying kinetic energy of its charge simply dissipated, translated not into a shock wave, but into a gentle, expanding pressure wave that rolled outwards. Where it passed, the jagged edges of the glassed plane were smoothed further. The chaotic mana residues in the air were calmed. The psychic echo of the Beast Monarch's rage was gently erased. Goku stood, his arm extended, fists still clenched. He looked at the fading motes of golden light drifting from where the monarch had been, then down at his own fist. The exhilaration of the direct contest was still there, buzzing in his veins. But underneath it, rising to the surface now that the immediate thrill had passed, was a new, sober understanding. He had just erased a sovereign entity of this world with a fundamental expression of his own being. He looked up, his eyes finding Jin-Woo's across the field. Jin-Woo saw it too. The understanding in Goku's eyes mirrored the conclusion his own analytical mind had already reached. The truth was now unavoidable, hanging between them in the cleared air, heavier and more final than the pressure of any monarch. Goku's way, the path of limitless growth through combat, required conflict. It thrived on challenge. It needed stronger opponents, escalating threats, universes to test itself against. Its very purpose was to seek out and overcome ceilings, to turn every ending into a new beginning. His presence was a catalyst for chaos, for evolution, for stories that had no final chapter. Jin-Woo's way, the path of absolute dominion, required order. It demanded an end to conflict. Its purpose was to impose silence, to enforce a stable, controlled reality where the only will that mattered was his own. His presence was the period at the end of the story, the ruler who made further battles not just pointless, but impossible. They were not opposites, like fire and water. They were mutually exclusive realities, like a sound and the absolute silence that negates it. One could not exist without canceling the other's core principle. Goku, in his innocent quest for a good fight, would forever seek to destabilize the perfect order Jin-Woo enforced. Jin-Woo, in his serene enforcement of finality, would forever seek to extinguish the restless flame of Goku's growth. The silent realization was their true battle, and it had just ended. It had been fought not with fists or armies, but in the way they had dismantled the wave. One through effortless, expansive command. The other through boundless, focused effort. They had won together, spectacularly, and in that very victory, they had written the proof that they could never truly coexist. The duel of ideologies was over. The victor was a quiet, lonely truth. Segment 6. 2 Paths, 1 Truth. 44,980 characters. The cataclysm subsided not with a climactic detonation, but with a profound, weary sigh from the universe itself. The violent green lacerations in the sky slowly stitched themselves closed, the hemorrhaging system code fading first to a bruised purple, then to the indifferent, pale blue of a late autumn afternoon. The invading armies, their leadership fractured and their collective purpose shattered by the dual anomaly event, retreated. The monarchs withdrew their remaining fragments into the deepest, coldest corners of their dimensional domains, not in defeat, but in a strategic, stunned silence. The rulers retracted their holy light back into the administrative firmament, their logic cores overloaded by the illogical outcome. They did not flee in terror. They disengaged, recalculating, their eternal war momentarily forgotten in the face of a paradigm they could not contest. On the ground, the world began the agonizingly slow process of healing. Emergency sirens, which had wailed incessantly for hours, finally fell silent, their absence as startling as the noise had been. Hunter teams, shell-shocked and depleted, moved not as glorious defenders, but as exhausted rescue workers, extracting civilians from rubble that was often fused into strange, glassy shapes or dusted with peculiar luminous ash. The city of Seoul was a canvas of scars, vast tracts smoothed to bare bedrock, districts flash-frozen and now slowly thawing, others scoured clean by holy fire or swallowed by lingering patches of unnatural shadow that refused to dissipate. The hierarchy of the world remained. Gates would still appear. Hunters would still be ranked from E to S. The system's notifications still flickered in the corners of their vision, but the absolute pinnacle of that hierarchy, the unspoken peak above the S ranks and the national levels, was now incontestably, terrifyingly singular. Sung Jin-Woo, the Shadow Monarch, stood alone. He had not needed to conquer the other monarchs in that final, silent moment after the Beast Monarch's erasure. He had simply rendered them irrelevant. The message, witnessed by every power in existence, was unequivocal. Challenge the order he enforced, and you would face not just his infinite army, but the catastrophic, unpredictable chaos that his mere attention could now summon. He was not just a king, he was the law of gravity, and the recent events had been a demonstration of what happened when that law was questioned. Weeks passed. Reconstruction crews, aided by builders with earth-shaping magic, worked around the clock. A strange normalcy, brittle and haunted, began to return. On a solitary peak in the Bukhan Mountains, overlooking the vast patchwork quilt of the rebuilding city, Goku sat. He had changed out of his torn, battle-scarred gi into simple dark trousers and a plain gray sweatshirt provided by a deeply relieved and bewildered hunter association. His legs dangled over a precipice that dropped 1,000 feet to a pine-covered slope below. He was uncharacteristically still. The joyful, frenetic energy that usually crackled around him like an invisible current was absent. In its place was a deep, thoughtful calm. His eyes, usually alight with naive curiosity or battle lust, were sober, reflecting the vast, sprawling human endeavor below. He watched the ant-like movement of cranes and crews, the slow spread of new foundations over scars. He saw not just a city, but the shape of a world that had been bent, nearly broken, and was now determinedly setting its own bones. He felt, rather than heard, the presence arrive behind him. There was no rustle of cloth, no displacement of air, not even the subtle pressure change of a teleportation. It was a settling, a deepening, as if the concept of behind had simply gained mass and awareness. The long afternoon shadows stretching from the pines seemed to grow more substantive, their edges sharper. "You're leaving," Jin-Woo said. His voice was the same as it had been in the void, a vibration of dense, calm finality. It wasn't a question. It was an observation of an already completed fact. Goku didn't turn. He continued to gaze at the city, a soft, almost sad smile touching his lips. "Yeah," he replied, his voice quiet, matching the mountain's stillness. "I think I have to." He was silent for a long moment, gathering the thoughts that didn't come naturally to him. "I finally get it," he said, his tone one of dawning, solemn understanding. "Your world, it's got a shape. A really strong, clear shape, like a perfectly cut gem or a finished statue. Everything has its place. The gates, the ranks, the monsters, the hunters." He finally turned his head, looking over his shoulder at the figure standing a dozen paces behind him, framed by the darkening pines. Jin-Woo stood as he always did, hands in his pockets, a silhouette of absolute composure. "You're what keeps it that way. You're the hand that holds the shape together." Goku turned fully now, drawing his legs up and rising to his feet in one fluid motion. He faced Jin-Woo, the soft smile still there, but his eyes were intensely serious. "If I stayed," he shrugged, a gesture that was both helpless and accepting, "I'd keep trying to find stronger guys to fight. That's just what I do, and around here that either means bothering you, asking for spars, pushing at your peace, or..." He glanced down at the city, then back. "Or it means stirring up things that shouldn't be stirred, looking for challenges in places that would break. I'd crack the gem, I'd break the shape." Jin-Woo nodded, a single slight dip of his chin. He understood with a clarity that was absolute. Goku was not a destroyer out of malice. He was not a conqueror. He was a catalyst. In a universe of fixed, inherited power and rigid hierarchy, a catalyst for limitless personal growth was the most dangerous weapon imaginable. It was a solvent for all systems, a seed of infinite chaos. His very nature was antithetical to a world ruled by a monarch whose purpose was to end all systemic conflict. "You could stay," Jin-Woo offered, his voice unchanged. The words were not a plea, nor even a genuine suggestion. They were a final test of the hypothesis, an offering of a theoretical path. "Remain still. Do not seek." Goku chuckled, a warm, low sound that seemed to hold the memory of sunnier days and simpler fights. It was a sound that didn't belong on this quiet, solemn mountain. "I can't," he said, the warmth fading into simple, unshakable truth. "It's not who I am. Just like you can't stop being who you are. You don't fight to grow. You fight to end. That's your truth." He took a half step forward, not as a challenge, but as an emphasis. His gaze was direct, unwavering. "And my truth is, I need to grow. I have to. It's like breathing for me." There was no animosity in the space between them. No regret for the battle not fully fought. No resentment for the inevitable parting. There was only the clear, cold, perfectly still water of mutual recognition. They had stood at the pinnacle of each other's paths and looked across an unbridgeable chasm. Jin-Woo had witnessed evolution in real time, a power that treated its own limits as illusions, a strength that mocked the very concept of inherited final authority. Goku had witnessed true dominion, a control so complete it made struggle seem quaint, a power that turned the climactic battle into a matter of administrative efficiency. Neither was wrong, neither was weaker. Their truths were simply fundamentally, irreconcilably different. That was the problem. That was the only problem. I learned a lot, Goku said, his voice dropping to a sincere, almost reverent murmur. Thanks for the last fight. The big one, with the wave and everything. It was different, important. He wasn't thanking him for the thrill or the victory. He was thanking him for the lesson, for the revelation of a different kind of strength. Jin-Woo inclined his head again. This time, the movement was even more precise, a millimeter of acknowledgement. It was the highest form of respect he could possibly give. An emperor's bow to an equal who was not a rival, but a reflection in an opposite mirror. You showed me a variable my system could not compute, he stated. In his language, it was the ultimate compliment. It was an admission that his perfect understanding of all things had encountered an exception that had now been cataloged and understood, even if it could never be integrated. Goku grinned, the old familiar sparkle returning to his eyes for a fleeting moment, like the last flash of sunset. Maybe that's a good thing sometimes. Keeps you on your toes. He raised his right hand, bringing 2 fingers to the center of his forehead. The air around him began to waver, to shimmer with a heatless golden light. He closed his eyes, his focus turning inward, reaching out across the impossible, multi-layered vastness of the dimensional veil, seeking a familiar, comforting signature. A bright, fierce key, a gentle one, the chaotic blend of his home. A path back to a world where power was a journey, not a throne. He paused, the shimmering intensified. He opened his eyes, looking at Jin-Woo one last time. The grin turned into something softer, an offer of impossible friendship. Hey, Goku said, if your way ever gets, I don't know, too quiet, too still, you could always visit. My world's messier. My friends are always finding crazy, strong people, or weird gods, or something that needs a good fight. It was an invitation to a universe of endless struggle offered to the god of endings. A ghost of something passed over Jin-Woo's impassive face. Not a smile. It was too faint, too contained for that. It was the memory of a smile, the abstract concept of one, touching the corners of his eyes and fading almost before it was born. Unlikely, he said, the word final, but noted. Goku's grin was his final farewell, warm, bright, and utterly sincere. Take care, Jin-Woo. The light folded. It didn't explode or flash. It contracted, wrapping around Goku like a cocoon of brilliance before collapsing into a single pinprick star that winked out of existence. The space where he had stood was empty. A slight breeze blew across the peak, stirring a few dry pine needles where his feet had been. The peak was silent. Sung Jin-Woo, the absolute sovereign, stood alone as the wind picked up, tugging at his dark hair and black clothes. He looked out over his domain, the city, the country, the world. A world now secure, ordered, and forever marked. Not just by physical scars, but by the brief, terrifying passage of a phenomenon that had been classified as a storm, a battle, an anomaly. But he knew it for what it truly was, a question, a single blazing question about the nature of power itself. And now, the question had answered itself and, in doing so, had departed. He had enforced order. He had preserved the shape. By every metric of his existence, he had won. The shadows around him, which had been patient and observant, now deepened, flowing closer like loyal hounds. They were eternal. They were final. They were his. He turned, preparing to dissolve into the darkness, to return to the silent throne from which he watched over a world finally fully at peace under his command. But as he did, a single foreign thought lingered. Not a whisper of doubt, not a pang of longing. It was a pure, isolated datum, a memory file his flawless consciousness could not and would not delete. The memory of a power that was not a monument, but a living event, a force that had looked at the concept of absolute at him and had not seen a ceiling to be respected or a wall to be scaled. It had seen a starting line, and then it had smiled. Jin-Woo vanished into the shadows, leaving the mountain peak to the wind and the gathering dusk. The world, his world, returned to its measured, hierarchical peace. Gates were cleared by hunters of appropriate rank. The system's notifications were clean and precise once more. The drama of survival and ranking resumed, a structured game under a silent, watchful sky. But for the one being who ruled it all, who sat at the center of the web of death and order, the silence that was his kingdom now held a faint, echoing aftertaste. It was not bitterness, it was not envy. It was the phantom sensation of a boundless, impossible blue sky. A sky not of quiet, but of limitless horizon. A sky he would never need, a path he would never walk. But now, having met a traveler from that impossible expanse, he could forever imagine it.